folks, it's Ardwulf. Welcome. Today, we will be bringing to you something that I've been waiting for quite some time. This is World at War Magazine number 97, including the game Drive on Leningrad. This is episode 1, if you will, in Campaigns in Europe, which will be a series of games that will get started over the next several issues of World at War Magazine. I will talk about the game in a minute, but I've already taken the liberty of removing the rulebook from the magazine. So let's quickly buzz through the magazine before we get started with that. I will generally talk about the ads, at least to mention them, because they will be ads that will be of interest to many wargamers, including this. Strategy and Tactics Quarterly Alternative Strategies for World War I. This looks great. Coral Sea Solitaire, which I don't have, but it was a pretty well-received game. Midway Solitaire, which I also don't have, and the new version of Drive on Stalingrad, which is now available from Decision. This is a deluxeified version of the Thai Bomba release that came out 10 or 15 years ago, something like that, with a mounted map and all the fancy stuff that one has come to expect nowadays. Here we have our table of contents. We're not going to dwell on that. Army Group North, 1941. This is, of course, the topic of Drive on Leningrad. And we're going to get a very nice, very detailed, the articles are always worthwhile in these things, and the maps, that's a terrific map. The maps are fantastic as well. So can't wait to get started on this. Old East Front old hands may find this to be a little old hat, but it will give you at least some perspective, since the article is written by Joe Miranda, who designed the game, some perspective from a design standpoint on the game as well. And there's some bibliographical sources in here as well. Here's the design corner, also by Joe Miranda, who I don't understand how Joe does as much as he does. This is the ad for the people that bought the magazine off the newsstand and didn't get the game with it. MacArthur's Best General, George Kenney. This is an article by Matt Soltis. So this should be interesting as well. We got a Battle of the Bismarck Sea map, RAF Battle of Britain Deluxe Edition. This is still available from Decision, and that is an outstanding game by John Butterfield. The Ural Bomber, this will be of interest to some folks as well. This is the Wunderwaffen, or one of the Wunderwaffen that the Germans had come up with and never really put into service. I think they did build a prototype of that, but I don't know that it ever flew. Axis Empire's Ultimate Edition, I've already done some video on that. There'll be more sooner or later. Operation Torch by Alan Vinoy, very nice. So, interesting topic. This is the invasion of North Africa in 1942 by the Allies. And you can see, just off the top of my head, here are the U.S. landings, and here are the Commonwealth landings, and some U.S. forces as well. So, we get the cool little order of battle diagrams here. Nice in-depth articles in as is the case with S&T, Strategy and Tactics magazine. We get some really nice articles in World at War magazine as well. Tunisian Postscript, of course, a lot of other stuff happened after that. July Deal of the Month, any 3 folio games for $59. I haven't tried as many of the folios as I would like. In fact, I've tried 2. And I've tried, I think, 2 of the minis as well. Here's a game preview for 2 issues from now. Italian Campaign 43 to 44. Here's a little snap of the map. I've seen the map in person. Doc had it on a table at Origins. And then we have Volume 2, which will be coming out next. That's Case Blue. And then number 4 is D-Day to the Rhine. Then I think they're going to take a break and do a few more of these, I think. But I have a lot of questions about where they're going with this series. So, and here's a series look at all 4 maps that they're planning to do. So, Solitaire games, including Drive on Suez, Operation Typhoon, the Luzon Campaign, Commandos Europe, and Strike and Counterstrike. I basically know nothing about any of these, to be completely honest. Blitzkrieg, A Denial of Logistics by Arnold Bloomberg. This is in the context of Barbarossa. That could potentially be very interesting. Barbarossa Deluxe, I have not really looked at this yet either. This will be coming fairly soon. Battles in the East, Volume 3 from designer Tony Burkett and Decision Games, Drive to the Sea and Battle for Pomerania. These are both 1945. I expect very good things from this series, which has been extremely well received. Vernie Liebel's article on French New Caledonia has several pages here. The Sinking of the Royal Oak by Chuck Lyons, very cool. Well, it wasn't cool for the people on the Royal Oak. It's cool for us reading the article here in 2024. Partisans on the Eastern Front by M.J. Flynn. Might be very interesting. Here's the upcoming Foxconn in Dallas. Here's the link, foxconn.card.co. The registrations are open. I believe the slots are limited. I know I've talked to several people who are going to go to this. This is basically Decision's in-house convention. Media reviews of a book called Flawed Commanders and Strategy in the Battle for Italy 43 to 45. Here is an older game from Decision, Patton's First Victory, Tunisia. And you can get digital versions of the magazines as well. Here's D-Day at Saipan, which I want to say is Joe Youst, indeed. Joe Youst riffing on John Butterfield's original system. And three of the 5 games are John Butterfield games. The other 2 are done by Joe. Here's volumes 1 and 2 of Battles in the East. Tony's got extensive plans for this series, as we discussed in my interview with Tony, so check that out. Here's Operation Holland. We have already done a inside look at this game, so check that out. That was the previous last issue of Strategy and Tactics, and for that matter, we've already looked at War Plan Z. War Plan Z looks pretty cool. I have that punched and ready to go, and here's an upcoming Fall 2024 Grants Overland campaign. I need to pick that up. The Strategy and Tactics Quarterly does not include a game, but the magazine is outstanding. All right, so the game includes 2 things. This is a little different than your typical World at War issue that I've gotten in recent years. There's the rule book, which came glued into the magazine. You can remove it if you're careful. And a whole baggie of additional stuff, which I have not yet opened. So let's take a look at that. All right, so as is typical for magazine games, this comes with one more or less standard war game size map, the standard size being 22 by 34 inches. We also have the rulebook, like I mentioned. We also have a counter sheet, which we'll take a closer look at. And we have player aid cards. One typically does not expect player aid cards to be in a magazine game. But Decision has been working toward this project for some time. So I'm not particularly shocked to find a little bit extra here. Now, we are going to notice this is the more or less the Army Group North sector. Here we have Leningrad. Here we have the border, and there'll be a border down through the center of Poland here. That is this line, okay? So it's this 1941. The scenario itself runs from June of 41 to April of 42. We do have one counter sheet. It's a little bit bowed, but that's the post office's fault. On the new, thicker brown core Decision stock that they've been using. Once these are punched and clipped, this will be fine. And these do appear to be half-inch counters. Now, one of the things that you may notice basically immediately, the counters are pretty conventional. However, you may have heard of the Campaigns in Europe project as sort of a backdoor way to redo War in Europe. And now that I have at least glanced at this, I'm not really sure that is a good description. This appears to be a modular reimagining built on the War in Europe chassis. And one of the ways we can tell is, frankly, that there's one counter sheet as opposed to the 3,600 counters in War in Europe, which I just finished clipping the original SPI version of. And it's a marvelous game. It's got some issues, so this needed an update, but nevertheless, I've been very excited to see what Joe Miranda has done with this. We will immediately notice a couple of the differences on the counters. Whereas in War in Europe, you pretty much just had the factors. In this system, this is talked about in the rulebook, you've got a circle around the combat factor to indicate that the unit is elite, and a box around the movement factor to indicate that the unit is mechanized. There will be no more guessing whether a unit is mechanized and thereby qualifies for mechanized movement or not. It is on the counter. I recognize that many veteran wargamers did not really have a problem just knowing what units are what, but still you had infantry units with 10 movement points. You had to look that up if you didn't know, to know that those were in fact intended to be mechanized infantry units. This removes that ambiguity. We do also have the Finns, and we've got a couple SS units in black as well. And we've got a couple of guards units here. This is relatively early in the conflict. If we flip to the back, we'll notice that there is a reduced strength stripe on the backs of many of the counters. I like that as a visual indicator to make it obvious that the unit is down a step. And there's some markers for out of supply, which War in Europe did not have, by the way. And stuff for railheads and a couple other things. And War in Europe did have those. So again, I don't think it's I think it's premature and probably inaccurate to imagine this to be a replacement for War in Europe, which is something that I would eventually like to see from Decision. And I'm aware they've already done their own new edition, not even new anymore. It's now eons out of print and quite valuable. But I would like to see them redo War in Europe in full. And if this turns out well, I'm going to bust this out and play this at the earliest opportunity. All right, I'm reasonably sure that somebody is going to ask to see this, so I'm filming this post hoc here. What you have in front of you is the same map from SPI's original War in Europe. I do not have the Decision Games second edition maps to compare it to, but this then is the new map for campaigns in Europe. And you can see that the terrain is definitely quite different. We do still, and the map, the actual map framing is slightly different as well because the sizes are not exactly the same. But for example, up here at Riga, you've got the Dvina River. It's a minor river. So there's like a lot of minor rivers, but you'll notice on the original that there's not really a lot of designation between major and minor rivers. At least it's not particularly easy to tell the difference. So there are significant differences between the two maps here. You can kind of see, we have Königsberg just to kind of orient ourselves, and we've got some woods around Königsberg in the new map, and some additional minor rivers, and none of which is available on the original SPI maps. So these look, therefore, I mean, they look somewhat different, and they are definitely going to play somewhat differently as well, because there's noticeably more terrain on the Campaigns in Europe map than there are on the original, at least, War in Europe map. So the rule book is 16 pages. If Decision follows their usual pattern, there will be living rules that are available on the website. And you can tell they've been kind of working ahead of the curve here, because you'll see what I take to be American air units here, which obviously we don't have in this game. So there are zones of control. It's kind of a pretty basic move and fight, and then mech move and mech fight type of, or some variation thereof, type of system. Again, rather similar to War in Europe. But that's those are features seen in so many games that don't draw too vivid a conclusion from that. So 16 pages, and then the last 2.5 pages or so are the scenario. Here's where we find that it's 41, June of 41, the last week of June in 41 to the second week of April in 1942, and the Axis player is the first player. And then we've got a pretty open setup, as I recall. So this looks really promising, and I really looking forward to seeing what Joe Miranda, after many years of working on this, has come up with. Like I said, I've been waiting for this for a while. Now, the player aids. Okay, so we have one player aid here. I would photocopy this. You've got your CRTs on the front. You see an immediate change if you're familiar with War in Europe, in that you have two CRTs. War in Europe had 4, and the way you interact with those CRTs are very different. You've got a mobile CRT and an assault CRT. In War in Europe, you had like 4 CRTs, and there was the better ones on one end of the scale and the worst ones on the other end of the scale, and based on what nation you're fighting with and what year it is, you would determine which table you were rolling on. In this case, we have looks like a pretty complete summary of how the CRT works, all the modifiers, the explanation of the results, and the air superiority table. War in Europe, of course, had a fairly abstract air system, but a lot of air counters. And then we have a terrain effects chart on the back. I do miss having a graphical representation of this. For veteran wargamers, I imagine that won't be a significant problem. And then we have these other 2 cards. Oh, interesting. Okay, they are double-sided. And on the one side, I would photocopy these 2. You've got some Soviet abbreviations, Soviet setup, Axis and Axis the same. And then on the other side, you have these displays, which you will use in play. Units you can rebuild. These are the different weeks, and these are the different months. There'll be 4 weeks to a month. Not exactly quite pitched the same way as War in Europe, but the same basic idea. And then you have available air points and naval units up here, and then a general records track for each side, as well as a cost breakdown to see what it costs to rebuild each type of unit. So I am very much looking forward to getting this on the table. If I manage to do so anytime in the near future, I will 100% bring you a full report on how I thought it went. But for the moment, we have had a look at World of War Magazine number 97, including the long-awaited Campaigns in Europe, Volume 1, Drive on Leningrad.
Massive thanks to the patrons of Ardwulf's Lair, whose support and encouragement make what we do at Ardwulf's Lair possible. Thank you, patrons. Links to help support the channel are in the video description, so check out the Patreon, the Ko-Fi, and the merch store, where you can get snazzy Ardwulf's Lair t-shirts, drinking vessels, and other cool swag. There is also an affiliate link for Noble Knight Games in the video description. If you buy stuff through that affiliate link, it helps to support the channel with Noble Knight store credit. Thank you, Noble Knight. Until next time, thanks for watching, and happy gaming.
We'll remove it in post. Very interesting.